All right, so welcome back, everybody. This is the third talk in the second season of our series of the PIER series, which is Positivity and Innovation for Edmonton's Reopening. If you haven't joined us before, the series is mostly focused on local businesses and how they choose to adjust and act towards the pandemic, but also towards resiliency in general. We found that there was a lot of positivity lacking originally when the pandemic hit, and Edmontonians are very strong and powerful people, and so we definitely wanted to hear from what they were doing because we've heard some absolutely incredible stories from a lot of really cool businesses and entrepreneurs. And so we're really excited to share some more stories based around this positivity and innovation. So before we get started today, I do just want to start with our land acknowledgement. So Homestead and myself honors and thanks the many First Nations on whose historical and traditional lands Edmonton was founded, including the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge and embrace the fact that we are on the traditional land of Treaty 6 territory and the traditional Métis homelands of Region 4. We acknowledge the diverse Indigenous peoples whose ancestors' footsteps have marked this territory for centuries, from First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and now settlers from around the world. We do this to create awareness that we are all treaty people and to show recognition and pay respect for Indigenous people and the traditional territories on which we live, work, and play. We take our responsibilities with Indigenous people seriously, and together we call upon all of our collective honored traditions and spirits to work in building a great city for today and future generations. Homestead holds the values of inclusiveness and diversity deep within the founding of this space, and this series was created with those same intentions. So as we move forward, things will be much more positive, and we'll be talking about all of the things that we can bring together as a community to increase supporting each other. Today our focus is going to be with our amazing speaker here. We have Roberta Taylor here from Village Goods, which is a store that proudly provides support to the Global South through Fairtrade products, many other locally made things as well. And we're going to be talking about a transition that they've gone through not only with branding, but also with the pandemic itself. So without further ado, I'm going to let Roberta introduce herself, but also if you ever have any questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. If you're listening at home, obviously you won't have a chance, but feel free to reach out to Village Goods on any of their social media as well. So welcome, Roberta.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good, yes. Sorry.
No
Currently,
worries.
I'm still half asleep. Yeah. No, it's exciting to be here and have this conversation.
Yeah. So did you want to tell us a little bit about Village Goods, or as some people might know it, or formerly 10,000 Villages?
Yeah, for sure. I can kind of, tell you who we are, where we've come from, and a little bit about where we're going. So yeah, my name's Roberta. I've been managing the shop here for over 8 years. And I came into this role after coming to Alberta from a remote corner of northwestern BC, where I was actually head of IT for a small Indigenous school district. So I've always had my greatest asset's been my ability to learn new things and continued curiosity, and that's been very, very true for this role. But I've always been a Fairtrade shopper, much longer than a Fairtrade retailer. And at the core of it is that it matters how the people who make the things that I buy, food, clothes, everything, how those people are treated, because all people deserve respect and dignity and kindness. So those sort of core values have been built into our shop. It opened in Edmonton in 1986, originally under the name of Self-Help Crafts, and then it operated as 10,000 Villages. It was one of up to about 50 that were operating across the country at the organization's peak. 10,000 Villages Canada was a program of the Mennonite Central Committee, which is the relief and development branch of the Mennonite churches in North America. And so over the past few years, challenges sort of stacked up one on top of the other, and the Mennonite Central Committee Canada no longer felt that they could continue to operate the 10,000 Villages stores. So early this year, they announced that they would be ending their Canadian operations. The US 10,000 Villages, which is like a sister organization, still exists. So at that time, our board and society, they had some really big decisions to make, and they talked about ending our shop, closing it up. But we have people on our board of directors and in our society who've been here for that whole time, since 1986, who've really poured their hearts into this and who really care. And we talked about how our commitment's always been to our artisans, not to a particular brand or organization, even though we're deeply intertwined with the Mennonite community. So they decided that we'd continue as an independent shop. So we're keeping the same model, which is we're a not-for-profit retail store with a volunteer-supported model. We currently have 2 paid staff and between 30 and 40 active volunteers that keep everything running. So it's a little different than regular retail. So this all happened just as the pandemic was starting. I was actually in the middle of writing a detailed business plan as everything closed up. And we had the society meeting about staying open, the final meeting to approve that business plan over Zoom, which trying to organize voting by the proper rules with a Zoom meeting was a real challenge, but we figured it out. So that's where Village Goods was born. It was born in very strange times. So you sort of thinking about this, realize we lots of businesses are talking about pivoting, like just, okay, how do we keep doing what we're doing but focus different? And we kind of had to do a double one of those. So not only were we losing our main source of product, because over 90% of our product came through 10,000 Villages Canada, but we also lost all our marketing and store support. We lost access to our point of sale system, historical data. We were losing access to our email system, merchandising, HR support, everything. And at the same time, we lost the ability to open our doors to the public. So we were shut for over 3 months. And so our transition from being part of this national organization to being an independent local business is very tangled in the COVID stuff at the same time. So that's, it's been really interesting. But, in a lot of ways, the timing was actually pretty good. It was okay because the closure gave us an opportunity to really dig into the work of finding the new suppliers, planning for upcoming seasons, learning how to use the new computer system, learning how to put up a website, social media, all of that. So we went from working with basically one wholesaler to working with over 40, because most Fairtrade suppliers, with a handful of exceptions, are really little. I feel like probably most of them are run out of their garages. Like, these are people who have a deep emotional connection to the communities that they're working with in developing countries, and they're very small. So we have to work with a lot of them to keep a wide range of product. And a lot of our customers are really committed to us, and also really committed to specific artisan groups and product lines that they've known over the years. And some of those have been difficult that we haven't been able to source, some we have, but there's been a lot of work there. And at the same time, my assistant manager got to learn about social media in a hurry, and figured out how to do Facebook and Instagram in a way that was consistent and fit the brand we wanted. And she also started learning how to do direct email campaigns using MailChimp, and that, because we hadn't even planned to build a website, we're like, well, I guess we have to now. And so threw that in there. Thankfully, I can do the tech and she can follow up with the fine detail, and she's a really good communicator. So we make a really great team, and that's enormous. And so now we have been open again since June 9th. We're open 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, in order to give us time to do our other work and make sure that our volunteers, that enough of them who are comfortable coming back, that we can make everything function well and safely. And it's great because we're getting to hear from our customers in person again, and we're encouraged. People are super supportive. It is a little overwhelming and daunting looking at planning for fall and the holiday season without the historical data that I'm used to relying on and that. But there's been some changes that make that a little less scary. the way we're purchasing now means that instead of planning ahead a full 12 months, I can make my best guess now, but I also can reorder and have product within a few weeks, instead of if we had sold through a product before, it might be between 6 and 18 months before it was available again, because of the way Fairtrade buying works. So, that's good. It's the way the Fairtrade business functions is a little different, but being independent and working with all these other smaller companies has shifted us to behaving more like I think most retailers are used to doing it. So that's helpful, because then when I talk to other folks, they have really relevant things that they can say. The Fairtrade community itself has grown really hugely in the last decade. So this is a really good time to be branching out and really being able to curate that product to suit the community that we're in and really fit into our local community as a place that has the things that our neighbors are looking for. The Old Strathcona community is growing and it's changing. And of course, right now we're looking at a fairly uncertain economic future. Like, there's a lot of questions over how stuff will look in a year or 2 years or whatever. But I think there's a few things that aren't going to change. One is that the plan for increasing the population density of this area, I think that's going to keep happening. Like, people need to be close to the university and the hospital and being able to be close to downtown. And so I think that population of folks who really live in this neighborhood is going to continue growing. And then I also think that interest in shopping locally and ethically, people who start really thinking about that and begin to understand why it's important and feel personally responsible for making really good choices, that doesn't stop. And I think that as that's a part of our customer base that isn't going to go anywhere, because that commitment is still strong and those people are really passionate. So yeah, now our aim is to get through everything with our team healthy and whole, and to build a solid foundation to grow on when the pandemic's over and we're sort of looking around us going, okay, now what? We're really fortunate, like our society and stuff is stable enough that I don't have to worry at the end of every week, did I hit a certain dollar amount? Did my sales go good enough? Can I stay open another month? Like, that's not my primary concern. My primary concern is really about learning how to be the best Fairtrade shop for this community, so that in the long term we're set up for really good success. And we want to be here 34 more years, sort of a thing. The nice thing is, in the midst of all this upheaval and change, our mission hasn't changed one bit. We still are here to provide that market for those artisans in developing countries that they wouldn't have access to, and to introduce our customers to the idea that their purchasing decisions make a difference in people's lives. So yeah, that's my not terribly short overview.
No worries. I think that's great. I love that you gave a little bit of a background too, because I know we were discussing just before we started letting people in from the wait room was there's a lot of questions about Fairtrade that people, they're not quite sure what's going on there. They know that people get paid fairly, but they don't really know how it works, like with the Global South per se, as opposed to working with like traditional Indigenous artisans as well. So I think that kind of gave it a very good overview of that you do work with artisans, and as well as all these small companies that you talked about, because I know that's always been the most difficult part, is sourcing Fairtrade product, because Cisco won't list it all, or this won't list it. And I know every time I've attended a Fairtrade conference, I've always heard like, we're trying so hard to get into Sobeys or something like that. So having stores like yours makes it much more accessible, which is great to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and have you seen like the willingness of other like Canadian fair trade companies willing to help out? Like, I know, is it Camino that's based out of Ottawa?
Yeah, we've been really fortunate. So there's 7 of us who were formerly 10,000 Villages who are continuing across the country. And we've been working together as much as we can to, you know, just trade information, support each other, make sure people are getting what they need. And during the beginning of that transition, a lot of the Canadian fair traders reached out and were like, you know, hey, how can we work with you? How can we support you? And, you know, some of our remaining stores are really, really tiny. And they're still being so wonderful about being willing to work with them and letting us purchase as a group, even though we're all independent. We don't even have the same names anymore, any of that. They're like, no, we recognize you are a community of sorts. And I think that's one of the things I love about Fairtrade and doing business with fair traders is that it really is viewed as a community, and people are often just willing to go above and beyond just because this is something that they're passionate about, and they understand we're all working together for something that's kind of a little bigger than all of us. And that's, you know, that's really kind of rewarding when it is sometimes, like you said, really difficult. You're like, man, this should be easier, but everyone's trying. Like, you can see that. So
Definitely. I think that's really admirable because it is overwhelming, let alone when supplies get cut off due to like travel restrictions, other things. I know we've seen a fair amount of posts from Fairtrade Canada itself saying, you know, we're having problems with the people that we work with who are cocoa farmers. And just seeing the sort of how COVID has affected where our supplies come from and where those developing countries, how they're dealing with it, has been very, very sad to see. So I'm glad to see that within the community here, there's still that big push to support them.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because it really highlights how fragile some of these systems are for us. And I mean, we in Fairtrade talk a lot about this. We talk a lot about the impact, for example, of climate change on cocoa and coffee crops. We're really aware of the fact that because we look and we think of this as populations of and communities of people. These are these growers, and now they can't grow that because their climate has shifted, or they've got La Roya, or they've got something else going on with their crops that makes them not work. And at the same time, you see that ability of those same communities to come together and figure out ways to solve the problems as a group. And so, you know, it just, yes, it's fragile, but there's also so much potential for finding solutions and whatever. It's been really neat seeing how many of our artisan groups very, very quickly started producing beautiful face masks. Like, we need them in our communities, everyone else will need them. And it was very, very quick that some of them. And so you're like, that's awesome, because maybe the demand for whatever they were making before has dropped because these stores aren't open, but here's something else. So
Definitely, because I know some people, you know, they think coffee, they think tea, they think cocoa, but they don't think textiles. And that's actually a huge part of fair trade.
mm-hmm.
And so being able to support them with something like a face mask is definitely, you know, it helps us, it helps them, and we're going to need it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So one of the questions I had was kind of about that, because especially in the textile part of fair trade, a lot of that work is done by women. It is typically the way that women get jobs in a lot of these countries. And through that, we've seen that COVID-19 has really affected working women especially, and that childcare has fallen a lot on women to kind of just deal with. Is that something that you've seen like affecting the products coming in from the global south, or is it just kind of that always that way?
I think that with so many of our artisan groups, the reason that fair trade works so well is that it often allows these women to do this work from home. Depending on the culture, they may actually not be able to do work outside the home in some cases. And in some cases, they have that option. They can come into the workshop and work in this community, and they often really enjoy that, but they also are able, if they need, to work from home. I know some groups had to shut down for a while until it was safer, or change how they were doing things. But I think that at the end of the day, I think it's mostly that in a lot of those communities, the burden of childcare still falls on women, and that hasn't changed. But what they've done is they've figured out ways to work around that. And so, I don't want to speak for all groups. I am not there. I don't know, but I think for at least some of them, the difference is much less than we felt here, in North America and Europe, where if a woman works, it's almost guaranteed that she would need childcare if she has small children, because there's not a lot of work that you can do, in among the rest of your responsibilities in your home.
Yeah, I kind of find that interesting that they basically already had work from home set up, because I know a lot of people were scrambling. There's some governments across our nation that actually haven't even allowed people to start working yet, because they haven't figured out VPNs or things, IT things. But it's interesting that they were almost already set up for this for some of them, just because of their culture. And I find that's very interesting to hear.
Yeah, I think it's interesting seeing where we have different resiliencies, and where um, groups have, yeah, like they said, they're already set up for this, or it's much easier. And some of that is the nature of the work. If you're doing, embroidery piecework, you can do that from anywhere. And of course, also, a lot of the artisan groups that we work with are working already with marginalized communities, even within their own culture. And so in a lot of cases, they're already accustomed to looking for ways to accommodate what people need, in order to have, this ability to make a living. So.
Yeah, I found that really interesting. I know sometimes when you go into 10,000 villages formally, I haven't been into New Village Goods yet, so I can't say I've been in quite yet, but you'd see like a little story that goes with some of the items as well, and it would explain, I think there was a soap one that really kind of hit home for me, just hearing about how being able to make this product took somebody out of like extreme poverty of living essentially, I think it was on next to a train track. And, having that personal story does really make a difference. And it kind of brings that local feel to it, I found.
Yeah, one of the things that I think that it just is at so much of the heart what we do is that if you connect to a product as something, a person that you could like, you can relate to in some way, you realize like this person, they made this with their hands, they did this. If you can connect that emotional connection, um, that's really powerful. And I always remind myself, like, if I go to the drugstore and buy a bar of soap there, someone made that too. They might have made it under very different circumstances and working conditions and in a very different place, but everything has a human behind it. And when we look at the small differences that buying a bar of soap that was made, that did like allow someone to be lifted out of poverty, that's really powerful. And when we were still at 10,000 villages, we had access to sort of their data. And at that time, over 70% of the artisans we worked with were women, because women have such a lack of access in a lot of places to work, especially, women in extreme poverty. And when you see interviews with these women, there's two things that you hear that always just absolutely blow me away. And of course, the first is my child is studying and they're being an engineer, they're being a doctor, they're becoming a whatever. And the second is people respect my opinions now. People listen to my thoughts. Men listen to my business advice. Like, those just floor me, because that's so powerful in any culture, in any community around the world. To feel that you have a voice where you didn't before is just life-changing. So that gets me really excited, and it makes me really happy whenever we can connect customers to those stories.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's really amazing that 70% would be women. I think most people wouldn't expect it to be that high, especially with they maybe don't understand how like the co-op part of some of some of the producers work. But I think there was one story at the last Fairtrade conference, which I actually got to attend, which I probably shouldn't have considering it was in March. But they were talking about how one of the women who worked to make the cocoa to make it into a chocolate, like the little nibs so that they could send it out, when they made the actual bars, they put her face on it. And she was like, I'm famous. I've made it. This is it. And it completely, like, you see her face in the video, and it's just like the confidence that you spoke about is like, you can see it. You can see that they now feel like, oh, I'm a worker. I work in business. I know how to do this. I'm on this. Like, it's amazing to see that empowerment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's really it. It's that giving people tools. One of the things I love is when I see products from our artisans in sort of big box type stores where I recognize this group has gotten the skills now to reach out and market themselves to regular retail shops, and they know what they need to ask for. They know how to do the things, and they didn't have those skills when they began, and I just love that.
Oh yeah, I mean, when you see it expanding, like, even I'd say even in the last like 4-ish years, the amount of products that I've seen that, you know, we had to bring in as when I worked as Fairtrade campuses, it, it's incredible. You walk down Safeway or Sobeys aisles now and you're like, wait a minute, they know this brand? Like, how did they figure this out?
Yeah, it's really encouraging.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited as well to hopefully get some more fair trade baking in, which has been one of my quarantine activities. We always try to figure out something, right? So one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, because specifically like being on White Avenue for 34 years, I know a lot of that is walk-in traffic, right? There's a lot of people who walk by that store, and like I was telling you earlier, I didn't even know when I bought my first set of earrings from there that, you know, people were paid correctly. I was just like, these are beautiful and I want them. And obviously with being closed and not reopening until June, um, the pedestrian traffic, now that they've kind of closed off White Avenue to allow that expansion, have you seen it come back?
So White House has been fairly busy. I think people are desperate to get out of their houses. Um, and we're really glad that the OSBA put that expanded sidewalk in, because before they did, we were seeing way too many people on way too small of a sidewalk, and they weren't really thinking. They're like, oh, I'm outside, it's safe. And I'm like, well, maybe not. And so that's been really nice. And it's given people a place to sort of make a destination that's out and open and safe. And so I think, I don't know if it's increased the traffic or not, but it's made it feel safer and way more welcoming. And it's created, like I said, this destination. So you'll look and you'll see someone sitting at the table eating their ice cream and visiting, and they'll sit there for 2 hours and they'll just be clearly having a great time. And that's really nice. And I think that it just creates this sense of, I don't know, like a community or neighborhood that is really, people are looking for that right now. And of course, we definitely do see lots of walk-in traffic still. Like, we've really reduced hours, but what we've been finding is that our sales aren't that much lower than they would have been, as much as you'd think. I mean, they're definitely lower, but they're not as much. And so, and then we started a little bit ago requiring folks to wear masks, because so many of our volunteers are elderly, and we just weren't seeing the respect. Like, we were hoping people would show up with them more, and they weren't. So we're like, okay, we're just going to say you have to do that. And one of the interesting things we saw was our in-store foot traffic dropped a little bit, but our sales didn't change at all, because it really brought out to us that a lot of our customers are really, they're seeking us out. They're coming to us on purpose. And that walk-by traffic is great for introducing folks to us and giving us a chance to tell them about Fairtrade or whatever, but those aren't our core shoppers. So it's been interesting just seeing all those pieces kind of play together, and sort of trying to figure out, okay, well, what's driving this and that, and yeah, we have these conversations at the store all the time. Does it feel busy or less busy? I don't know.
For sure. And
Yeah.
with that, like you've also moved to some online sales now as well.
Hmm. Yeah, the online stuff is really interesting. When we first did it, we didn't have access to any of the lists of our previous, so we're sort of starting from scratch, but the word got out pretty quickly, and initially our online sales were almost all coffee, because that's really the repeat item that brings people back and back, because they love level ground coffee and they keep coming back. So that was great. But it also, even though we're open again, that has still continued, and we still have some folks who prefer curbside, which is great, because I actually personally hope that that continues being something businesses offer indefinitely, because if you have reasons that being in a shop isn't good for you, or just convenience, it's really nice. And then we've had a little bit of interest from folks who know about us but don't live in Edmonton, and they're really excited that we'll, within Alberta, we can ship to them, and so sort of touching base with some of those former customers who've now moved further north or whatever. That's been good. So it's definitely been worthwhile. We certainly couldn't keep the business running just with our current online, but also just learning how to grow that, and how to, one of the things we already knew, but I think it's really been brought home to us, is that our shopper is largely an online browser, so she'll often come in knowing what she wants because she's already looked at our website, but she wants to come in for that experience and look around and whatever at the same time. And so, it's really hard to tease those two pieces apart. Someone came in because they saw these really cool earrings online, but they don't necessarily tell you that when they're at the till, right?
Mm.
But they definitely work together. We've seen that really clearly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's kind of given you a bit more understanding of your customer then.
I think so, yeah. And I mean, it was one of the good things that in the last few years before they closed, 10,000 Villages Canada had done a lot of work on identifying their customer. And for us, it was really fairly spot on. And so building on that work, and then knowing kind of, we've been thinking about who we've been seeing and seeing if that changes and stuff. Those are really good tools to have. So
I can definitely say I'm a browser for sure. I am like I want to go see what's there, but you can't quite tell how big the earrings will be or things like that. So I
yeah,
definitely am one of those people that like I look at it online and then I'm like, yep, this is the thing. So
yeah.
that's pretty spot on. I feel very seen right now. um, I would say as well, like you said, a lot of people they were looking for coffee, and we've seen kind of an uptake in how many different producers we have, or roasteries, or people selling it within Alberta. Like I know we have quite a few now. Kicking Horse, Earth Group does their own as well, which is actually Ethical Beans supplying them the beans. But it's very interesting to see like a company like Ethical Bean become as big as it is, and it's not that like niche one. Especially with Kicking Horse, I find that people are just like, oh, it's just coffee. They don't really think
Mm-hmm.
about it as like fair trade coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's kind of been a trend now that it's been adopted at universities as much as it has. Do you kind of feel like that's been one of the pushes for that, or that it's just people
I
like
think
Alberta things?
I think there's that sense of this is local as a driver. It's really good. I think that the quality of all the fair trade coffees I've ever tried has been just above and beyond, and people aren't stupid. They know it tastes good. And then there's just been some interesting changes, like about 2 or 3, maybe a bit more, I lose track, a number of years ago, A&W switched all their coffee to fair trade. They did it very quietly. They weren't doing it because from my perspective as a customer, that because they thought more people would come there, but it seemed like they were doing it because it was part of their bigger business ethos that they wanted. And so there had been some awareness. They'd realized this was a thing, and they worked with their supplier to do that. And I think that that's the kind of change that ultimately I think the fair trade movement wants to make, is that that it stops being special, but this is just how we do business. You know, if we want good coffee, of course we're going to pay the growers and the roasters fairly because it yields a better product. And so I think that there's a whole bunch of pieces in there in that move towards it becoming more common.
Mm-hmm. And even like Fairtrade chocolate bars, you see them a lot more now. Even when you go to Mech, I think that was the first time I was like, ever looked at their snack stuff. I was like, oh, I know that symbol, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's another business that they've done a lot of fair trade, and they've done it relatively quietly. They have a lot of fair trade clothing, which has been very hard to find. And again, it's just sort of saying, well, here's a company, this fits our values. And I think that that's really encouraging as well. And I think that the small fair traders really kind of trailblazed that. But, you know, on the one hand, I want to see this business be here for another 30 years. But on the other hand, I'd love it if we didn't have to. I'd love it if that we could sort of see a shift in consumers in general, so that that's just how business worked. It's a bit of a pipe dream, but I can hope.
I don't think it's a crazy one. I think more than ever, we're seeing this support local, but also support marginalized groups, like you said, or people in extreme poverty. There has been like a downturn in charitable donations during COVID because a lot of people have lost jobs or whatnot. But I think if they realized, oh, by just purchasing my regular coffee, I'm also still helping, I think that can definitely impact people. I know that's kind of made me feel better about not being able to give as much or not being able to volunteer time, like to go do events or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to the smaller ones, because, you know, like a Camino is, they're quite well known at this point, I feel like. But I still find, even as big as they are, Ethical Bean is not as well known in Alberta, I find. And we have a lot of people who like to use those little K-cups. And when I found out that theirs were completely biodegradable as well, I was like, well, why are we not doing this? Because it's good for climate, it's good for the producers, it's good for Canada because they're a Canadian company. I didn't see any issues there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Basically, they try to make it as easy to support their product as possible without even really saying all of those benefits.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think part of it for growing is just that awareness of making the connections between the people who need the product with the people providing that. You know, even with us, I found like I'm looking for something and I'm like, this has to exist, but it can be very challenging. And so for the average consumer, you know, they're not necessarily going to make those as easily. So, you know, that's one of the things that I think we exist as a store, is to help people make those connections too. And if they recognize the brand that we carry and they start seeing it elsewhere, like we have some product that, yeah, you could get in a lot of places, but I want you to now notice, oh yeah, Camino, that's fair trade. I remember talking about that at that store. And then I don't care if you don't buy it from me, you buy it from someone else. At the end of the day, you know, that's still a win for the big picture. So.
Definitely, and I think that's where it's kind of unique that you are a non-profit organization, is you still want to support the cause more than anything. So it's that lack of money focus that I think a lot of people maybe feel more comfortable in your store as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, most of our sales associates are volunteers, and it's been a challenge teaching them how to do sales because they're like, I don't want to pressure someone. I'm like, no, we're not asking you to pressure anybody, but understanding that good customer service doesn't have to be high pressure, and understanding that you just want to help people find what they need, and sort of training folks on that's been real, like learning, sort of thinking about it deliberately. Well, how does this look? And we need to sell enough product to keep the lights on and pay our staff, but we're not worried about, you know, making enough. You know, we don't have great genes of expansion or shareholders to worry about or any of that. And so we are in a unique position where we can think about these things from a slightly different angle, I think. And hopefully people do feel really comfortable in the shop and and like they're welcome and that they can ask questions and maybe learn something. And it's pleasant.
Yeah, I mean that's the ideal shopping experience when you're trying something new as well, right? Is not to feel pressured and to understand that education piece if you want to. I mean, you
Hmm.
don't have to, but if you do, it's much more comfortable, I found. Like if I had questions, like the first time I saw those little snacks, they're like dried banana chips and whatnot, I was like, I didn't know about this because Fairtrade bananas and Fairtrade fruit in general for us is very hard to get in Edmonton.
Hmm.
So I was like, wait, I didn't even think that they could come in dried.
Yeah, for
You get
sure.
to have those fun conversations, right, of discovery. And
Hmm.
it's, I've always found it interesting as well because when you were all tied together as stores, every store was so different and unique. And so it always kind of felt like they were independent already, which I find pretty fun. And luckily in Alberta, we got to keep both of you, which
Hmm.
we're pretty spoiled with that because I know Manitoba is incredibly involved in fair trade. They've won like City of the Year, all of those awards in I think it was Brandon that
Hmm.
last won it, and they lost both of theirs. So it's it's one of those things like have you thought about potentially trying to send out the goods to those people or
So we're not shipping outside of Alberta because of the tax. We're run by volunteers, but the
mm,
Calgary Villages Calgary, they're called now. They have someone who's doing that, so they can ship across Canada. So they've been sending a lot to Winnipeg
yeah.
because the community in Winnipeg really misses their stores. So it's been really good, and I can send people to them if there's, especially the food products that really aren't going to be much different from place to place. That which is one of the fun things about staying close and working together. Still, is that yes, we're independent, but we're still coming at this as a team effort. So.
Yeah, that's really awesome. I think we've been trying that more even in the co-working community lately is we're not competition because we do different things, like if you go to a Sparrow or a Work Nicer, you're going to find different services, different community, and you find one that kind of works with you. So I like that the cooperation over competition feel. I'm a big fan of that. And I think by you and Calgary supporting each other, that's such an important and great thing to do.
Yeah, and it makes it feel less lonely, and you feel encouraged, and that's pretty important right now.
Definitely. That's been one of the consistent things that we found. We started this series at the very end of May, and it just everyone consistently throughout this pandemic has been looking for camaraderie of some sort, community of some sort, and being able to feel connected, and especially within their own city, because those are the people who know exactly what you're going through, right? Like we know that we can go to White Ave and now we can walk around and it's a little bit safer and we can talk about that. And we don't have to necessarily explain the entire situation, so people just get it inherently, which is nice. Um, do you find though that specifically within the fair trade community, that's always been something and you'll continue to have that moving forward?
I think one of the interesting things from the Canadian perspective is that 10,000 Villages really dominated the fair trade craft market, and there wasn't a lot of independent shops outside of that. And so what we saw, different, like Level Ground and Ethical Bean and different companies like that had grown up. I think that there was less of shops like us really there outside. And one of the things that we're looking forward to the next time we have an in-person fair trade conference in Canada is starting to build something with those independent retailers that are like us, especially in the craft marketplace where we're not a grocery store, and saying, hey, like we can be supporting each other better, because I think before, if you weren't to 10,000 Villages, you kind of probably didn't have a lot. And because we had the support as an organization, we didn't think to look outwards as much as we could have. So I think there's a real potential there to build something new and really helpful. But it's, brand new.
Yeah, which is kind of exciting, like you said. This all came about at a very interesting time and made it uh, a little bit easier almost to explain to people the situation because you were closed anyway, so it didn't confuse too many people, I find.
Yeah, and it's funny because we'll have people say, "Oh, I'm so glad you're still here," and we have no idea if they mean because 10,000 villages closed or because of the pandemic. They're just glad we're here. We're like, sweet, that's cool.
Yeah,
Because yeah,
exactly.
people are just happy to see businesses open and being there. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So one question that I've been consistently asking everyone through this, it was mostly focused towards entrepreneurs, but I'm sure we can definitely make it fit for this. But it was essentially, in your experience, having moved to Edmonton, is there something that's really special about Edmonton or makes it appealing for people to start businesses that you've seen, or maybe that community aspect in Edmonton that's been a little different than other places that you've lived?
so I I came here from um, a community of 30 families, half-hour drive from the nearest store. And I had never lived in a city aside from going to school. And I always say that Edmonton's the smallest big city I've ever encountered. I had no connections here when I came here, and it wasn't long before I started meeting people who knew people I knew from another sphere. And I love the way that the different communities are really intertwined. So, whether it's the arts community or music or businesses and stuff like that, there's lots of really interesting overlap, and there's really phenomenal creativity here. And that's something that I've loved as a person just living here. And as we're getting to know our business community better, one of the things that I've appreciated that's come out of the pandemic is that I've seen a lot more people, like whether it's business owners or the like groups like the business associations, of really thinking about how we actually can practically support each other and really starting to make more connections and like talking to neighbors more and stuff. And then you start finding out like there's really phenomenal stuff going here. Um, and I think that that sense of it being open to creativity, and then there's a real sense of being willing to view each other as neighbors, that I've encountered in lots of different ways. I think those are really helpful, from a business standpoint, of just feeling like you could try something new. And then, when you see the way the community comes out and supports things like the farmers market and some of these, like, you look on Instagram and there'll be like a little bakery or a little shop, and everyone's like, oh my goodness, we need to support them. They do such cool stuff. And I think that's something that's really, really special. And I love seeing that. And I think that's good for everyone.
Definitely. I know we had Linda Huang on. Um, I guess that was a little while ago now. It feels like yesterday, but that's COVID time for you. And for her birthday, she decided she wanted everyone to adopt a shop. And they raised over $8,000 in a week. Like they
That's
spent
awesome.
$8,000 locally just to, just because, that positive message of like, let's reach out, let's support these businesses. And, we had Johnny Jacques on as well from Print Machine. They've given back $30,000 to the community through those t-shirt sales that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely agree with you that it's become more of like, oh, these people are our neighbors. This store is something that's been in Edmonton since 1986. Like, that's something that we should be embracing. Like, that's the height of the Gretzky era to play off that. And now that hockey's back, right? But it's something that definitely I feel like has started a lot more since this has happened. I know people are still obviously going to support like the big chains of things, right? Mostly because they have drive-throughs, but it's been really inspiring to see like, oh, I love this little store. You should go there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons why we wanted to be able to talk with you as well. Is this store's been around for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I love is a lot of local shops have done like we have and gone, well, I guess we better get a website that works well because how else will we reach our people? And now, for people like me who really hate shopping, I can support my favorite local businesses while I'm sitting in bed. Like, I love that. I think that's really an unexpected side effect, but I would way rather give my business to those folks, and they've just made it easier for me. Um, and and that's kind of neat. But yeah.
100%, I'm there with you. Like now that I can buy like anything pretty much without having to go there, I'm just like, okay, why not? Like I'll pay the extra little bit of shipping because it's convenience, right? And
Mhm.
it's very interesting to see where some of these businesses have had to do that out of necessity, but it's also increased their customer base. And we saw that with actually, we had Philly Sticks on before. And now that they have delivery, they've seen like so many people who were like, we know you were downtown. We never wanted to drive down there. Now we don't have to drive down there to have your food. So
Mhm.
he's been spreading Filipino cuisine to the whole city, which is pretty
That's
fun.
awesome. Yeah, that's great. No, it's been really encouraging seeing people just trying to figuring out how to make things work and trying things out and seeing what works and I think through it all really they have been connecting with their communities in a way that's really exciting because that really makes us all stronger.
I definitely agree. I think that's pretty much the heart of it, and the resiliency that we see within Edmonton, right, is that community support for sure.
Hmm.
But I do really want to thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. I think this has been so interesting to hear about the perspective of a nonprofit fair trade store and something that people don't really think about. So I'm glad that we got to have this talk for sure.
Yeah, no, thanks for inviting me. It's been fun.
Yeah, so if anybody does want to visit, the website is, I believe you're just Village Goods, right?
Yeah, it's villagegoods.ca.
For sure. And then obviously Facebook, Instagram, you can always track them down. We've tagged them in all of our posts, so even if you're also following us, you can definitely find them there. Make sure to give them a like, give them a little shout out, right? At least make a little heart on something because they're a hardworking bunch, and like you heard, it's a lot of volunteers. So definitely make sure that you're showing support for people who are not only volunteering their time during the pandemic, but trying to make a pretty big impact. So I want to thank you again, Roberta. This has been a total joy, and I'm really happy that we got to spend our lunch hour talking about the cool parts of fair trade, some of the challenging parts of fair trade, and how we're going to be moving forward with fair trade. And I'm really excited and hopeful for the future. So I want to thank you very much for joining us.
You're so welcome.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me or to Roberta. We're always there to talk about fair trade. Um, if you work in the homestead space, I'm sure you've heard me talking about it quite a bit. So we'll look forward to that, and we'll see you next week for another fun session of PIER, where we'll be talking about even more resiliency in the Edmonton community. So have a fantastic long weekend, everybody, and try not to melt in the heat, but if you need to, make sure to go grab yourself a treat down at Village Goods. All right, thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.